Hey guys, I was asked to look at the Miami 2019 roster and evaluate it to see what can be done to improve prior to the draft and free agency this year. So I've had a look at the draft at Miami's roster, and they're currently the one of the highest payrolls in the league. Obviously, they made playoffs this year, but were ousted in the first round. So this needs to be a lot done to improve their roster. Um, Chris Bosch is actually on the books for the 2018-19 season, but his pay doesn't count against the cap, and he's actually paid under so that here Bosch is being paid 5.2 mil for the remainder of his contract, but it's paid via insurance due to his health. So that's not affecting their roster. Still, without that, Miami is still one of the highest payrolls in the league. The current. So we'll start by looking at the current roster, and then we'll look at draft options, and free agency, and what can be done to improve. So we look at the depth chart for the current roster. Hassan obviously is their main player, their highest contract, and in the playoffs he was completely smashed by Joel Embiid. Didn't show up for the playoffs at all. I think he was averaging less than 10 points per game and 10 rebounds per game, which is not what you want from your franchise player. Goran Dragic, the point guard, was an all-star, but that was due to a couple of injuries in the Eastern Conference, and he was the last man called up. But at least you can say that they do have an all-star in their point guard. But that was controversial too. I think Ben Simmons did a much better job and should have been called up. You look at their roster and the contracts that they've got. There is a balance of youth and vets. And you look at the starters' average PER rating of 17.05, and that was good enough to get them into the finals for this year. Those crossed out there are players that are coming off contracts, so none of them were key players anyway in their rotation. So the fact that they're all off contract you'd think frees up a bit of cap space, but none of those were on substantial contracts anyway. And we just look at the average PER ratings for their starters there. Hassan Whiteside was obviously their best player. During the regular season. Obviously, come playoffs, he wasn't the go-to guy. So now we look at the roster issues that they do have. Their four role players, or the four third-string options there, are all unfilled roster spots due to those players coming off contract. They're already at nearly 120 mil, so above cap, and they've only filled 10 roster spots. A couple of those players, Justice Winslow, Bam, he did a good job, are on decent contracts at the moment, but they're shelling out big contracts. The teens, the 10 to 17 mil range for a number of players. Recently, there was an article done now that the Kawhi issues has come to the fray, and there's a number of articles showing how two $10 million contracts, or two 10 mils plus a minimum contract, is the equivalent of a max salary, and that all teams would prefer to have one max guy than two 10 to 15 mil contracts. So in the draft, Miami have 0 draft assets, so they don't even have a second round pick. And shortly, I'll also be releasing a Toronto Raptors version of this and shows the same draft. So there's no draft roster improvements that can be done through draft. So it's all going to be done through free agency and trades. So what can be done? So no cap space, no draft assets. The Hassan Whiteside contract still 2 years remaining on that at 23.7 mil contract. It's probably sad to say it's probably their best asset, even though his stocks have gone down due to his performance in the playoffs. Goran's $18 million contract over 2 years for an all-star point guard is possibly their other asset that they've got. But there's not a lot to work with here. So for some reason, when you look at research into LeBron possible trades, Miami's name comes up only because LeBron used to play for them. But guys, this isn't going to happen. To make that happen, LeBron will have to opt into his player option at Cleveland, and Cleveland would have to accept Whiteside, Dion Waiters trade, and that would just cap their books even worse than Cleveland's books already are. So that's not going to happen. So what can be done? We look at a three-way trade with other sellers or other teams that have disgruntled players. So Toronto, DeRozan missed out a lot of the playoffs due to poor performance. Awesome regular season, All-Star and everything. Come the playoffs, just didn't step up to the mark. So Toronto are looking to adjust there. So we could do a deal there. Toronto would get Middleton and Whiteside. The Heat will get Valanciunas because the Heat are Toronto is keen to get them off his books. Miami would also get Tony Snell, who didn't perform in the playoffs either, and Milwaukee would get DeRozan. That deal makes sense in that Valanciunas, possibly a very similar player to Hassan, is developing his three-point shot. That's something he's been working on this summer, and with a similar performance rating over the regular season, but nearly 10 mil less in contract. That's a good deal. That's a decent trade there. Tony Snell has an upside. He's a three-point shooting stretch shooting guard, but didn't perform very well this season at all. So he's looking to improve his performance. There is plenty to like about him, but he just hasn't shown up in 2017-18 season. Raptors would be keen for that. They'd get DeRozan off their books. They needed a big, and they fill that Middleton role. They would re-sign Van Fleet and fill the void left by DeRozan, and their roster would look better. And Milwaukee, they needed someone to go with the Greek Freak, and that DeRozan trade there might work for them as well. So that's a possibility. Obviously, Kawhi's the disgruntled Kawhi has come up in the media, and he's wanting out of Spurs. Everyone has a pitch for him. To make that happen, you would have to, any potential asset you would have to trade and take on the one semi-bad contract that the Spurs have in Patty Mills. So Kawhi and Patty Mills to Miami for everything they own. And let's hope that Miami don't seriously even contemplate that. That's why it's Kawhi so serious. The one trade that I would be looking for is a Gortat trade. So we look at the Wizards roster, and we'll ship out Hassan and bring in Gortat, who is not too bad. He's got a better contract. So under the trade machine, where it says 2 years, that's based on the 2017-18 season. So those three players, Markieff Morris, Satoransky, and Gortat, all have only 1 year left on their contract. So that then means that for the 2018-19 season, you have those three players on a last year of their contract before they're up, which is good news for Miami because that frees up some cap flexibility. And those three players would all fit into possible starting roles, if not definitely depth off the bench, whereas Hassan was just clogging up space. So Gortat does a similar role to Hassan, probably not quite as well, but definitely Markeith Morris and Santarowski help improve the roster. So what does it look like? This fills that roster issue. So all those red circles are roster issues. Gortat would replace Hassan. Santarowski's the number 2, possibly number 1 point guard. While War was out, he did a great job during the season. I actually had him in my fantasy team. He was doing a great job, and then Wall came back, so then he was out. Morris fills that power forward position and would probably take the starting role above Josh Richardson as well. Bam could obviously go into the starting lineup too, and that provides you with the youth and experience. That's a decent roster now. Winslow, obviously a young guy as well. So you've got Santarowski, Winslow, Bam, all on rookie contracts still. And why would Washington want to do this? So Washington would have a roster that looks more like this now. So instead of having Gortat, who Wall despises apparently, they would have a starting 5 of Porter, Hassan, Kelly Oubre, John Wall, and Bradley Beal, which is a good starting 5. Their issue is that their depth as well. So they have big issues with their roster in that they only have 7 players left. If you take those their contracts that are up for renewal out, they have 7 players with a cap of 86 mil. You add in Hassan's 23 mil contract, and they're 110, so it's above the cap with still 4 spots to fill. So although that improves their roster, they've still got issues. So in summary, Miami have 10 roster spots only filled in 2019 and are already at the luxury cap level. Hassan didn't show up in the playoffs, and they need to do something about his contract, and that's possibly their only draft asset, even though it's not really a very friendly contract. Hassan does have plenty of upside though, and some teams who are looking to replace their big may look to him, but they need to turn that into a 2-for-1 or a 3-for-1 move. Maybe also look to other trades with Goran Dragic in trying to move him after his All-Star appearance this year. The other option is that they fill their last rounds with by buying second-round pick, or filling it up with just the mid-level exception and make those positions hit.